Hello everyone and welcome to this Let's Learn Substance Painter series, where we are learning by doing one lesson at a time. This is lesson 1 and it's aimed at new users and beginners mainly. We will not go over the menus or how to control different views in this video, but instead focus on texturing a model together and going over what we're doing and why as we go. For this lesson, we'll be texturing an old German hand grenade, and you can follow the link in the description below to download the model I've created for the lesson, both the high poly and low poly versions. Lesson 1 will focus on adjusting standard smart materials and adjusting them to fit our needs, using black masks and texture maps to create a non-destructive workflow and generate a realistic result in the end. There are chapters in the video if you want to look at a specific portion only, but for now, let's learn Substance Painter. Let's start off by creating a new project and select the file we want to use. If you're using the same file as I am, it is the handgrenade_low one that we select here. We can also change the document resolution to 4K for this one. If it slows down your computer, you can always set it to 2 or 1K as well. Let's leave the normal map format at DirectX as well and press OK. Here we can see the mesh in the 3D viewport on the left hand side and the UV map in the 2D viewport on the right. This should be the default view when opening Painter for the first time, so we should have the same window set up from the start. The first thing we want to do is to bake the details from the high polygon mesh onto the low resolution one, so that we have some maps to help us in the texturing process. To do that, head over to the Texture Settings tab next to the Layers tab and scroll down until you find the button that says Bake Mesh Maps and press it. This is Substance Painter's baking interface, where there's a lot of different settings for baking, but as this is the first lesson, let's keep it straightforward for now. First, we select the output size of our baked textures. I'll set it to 4K. Now we will import our high poly mesh here in the high definition meshes section by pressing the small button on the side. Select your high poly mesh and click open. Now you can see that a second blue mesh has been added on top of the previous one. This is the high poly mesh we just imported, and then there is a transparent wireframe mesh around everything. That's our cage, and it shows from what distance the rays will be cast during the baking process. You want this cage as close to the high poly mesh as possible without it intersecting. You can change the size of it by using the max frontal distance slider right here. You can see that if I make the distance too short, sections of the mesh will turn red, showing that you have an intersection and need to fix it. With the cage set up correctly, let's also set our anti-aliasing settings to ×4. You can go higher if you want, but this should be fine for us. Then, let's bake the selected textures to start the process. You can see down to the left what textures are created, and they are the default set ones for all projects. With the baking done, let's press return to painting mode and let's start texturing. Let's first double check that the baking process worked okay by rotating around the mesh a bit to see if there's any issues with any of the maps. As you can see, we now have some new normal information from the high poly baked onto the base mesh, and there's nothing standing out as having any problems, so everything seems good. If you're having any issues with how the mesh is looking, try to go back to the baking section and increase the cage size a bit to make sure it's not causing issues. Now let's move back to the Layers tab and start the texturing process. Press the new folder button here so that we can better group our materials. First, we want to create the wood material, so I'll name the folder that. I'll be using one of the smart materials as a base for this. Heading over to the Assets tab on the left, we can click the Smart Materials tab right here and just search for wood. There are a few good ones here, and I'll go with this one, Wood Walnut. Click and drag it over to the wood folder we created. We can see here that the material has been applied to the entire mesh, and we just want to add it to the handle. So we need to create a black and white mask that shows what parts of the UV map will have the texture on it. Let's right click the folder here and select Add Black Mask. This will create a mask that can be colored in black and white. Anything that is black in the mask will not have any texture on it, and anything that is white will have texture. Anything gray in between those colors will be shown slightly transparent depending on how white it is. So let's select the handle to have the wood texture. On the left hand side here, there's a button called Polygon Fill. When you press it, you get a few options above the 3D view on what type of selection we want to use. These are Triangle Fill, which lets you select single tries on your mesh, Polygon Fill for selecting single polygons, Mesh Fill for selecting whole separate meshes, and then UV Fill, which lets you select UV islands. Next to that is a slider for if you want to add, which is white, or if you want to remove, which is black. We'll keep this as white and select Mesh Fill. Since the handle is its own separate mesh, we can just click on the handle now and we can see that it gets the wood texture, and in the black mask we created, this is now colored white. Now we'll start changing the base smart material a bit to better fit how we want it to look. Let's head over to the right side and press the button on the wood walnut folder. This will show us all the parts of the smart material is built out of, and let us change it as we want. Here you can see that there are several layers with materials and masks stacked on top of each other, working a lot like Photoshop for example. Each layer added will show up over the one below pretty much. So the first thing I want to do is to change the color of the wood, so let's scroll down to the bottom and find the base material, and click on it to show all options below in the Properties tab. Click on the bar below the base color option to open a color picker. You can grab the pointer here, and I'll just change that to a less saturated and darker brown color, since the wood will be a bit older. Looking at the reference I have, the wood handle also looks like it has some finish on it, making it a bit more glossy than just raw wood. We can try to get closer to that look by going up and adding a layer on top controlling the roughness value of everything in the material, which is deciding how rough or shiny a surface will be, or how much light will be absorbed by the material and how much gets reflected back. So let's go up to the top of the layer stack and press the new Fill Layer button. This will create a basic color layer at the top. I'll rename this to Roughness Base. You can see that the layer only has a color tab activated, but you can press the Rough option here, which will add the roughness option. We can then also deactivate the color option as we don't need it. Now we can see that the roughness value is set fairly low towards the black end, which means it will reflect more light, and if it's more to the white side, it will absorb more light and look duller. It's a good idea to have a closer look here in the 3D view to see if it's looking like we want. Checking my references, it seems a bit too shiny for me, so I'll go back to the roughness slider and move it up a bit, and we can see that it looks less shiny already, and I think this is good for now. I also think that the height map is a bit strong on the wood. Since we want the handle to be pretty smooth, we can quickly change that by lowering the height map strength of the material from the drop-down menu right here. Click it and you can see the different maps we can change that are affecting the material. Select height, and then on the main folder of the wood material here, you can also see a number on the right side. This is the blending mode for the selected map as well as the strength of it. We can click the number to get a slider that will let us lower the strength of the height map. And if you look in the 3D viewport while I lower the slider, you can see that all the height information from the wood is slowly disappearing. We still want a bit of information, so let's keep it at something low like 20. For a base material, I think this is looking like a good start. It's a bit shiny, but we'll be adding some further changes to the roughness later, so I think this will be a good starting point. Now we'll be creating some damaged wood to make it look a bit more worn and old. To make things easier, we can collapse the wood folder and then duplicate it by selecting it and pressing Ctrl and D. Now we have a copy up, let's rename it to Wood Damaged and open up the folder. The first thing we want to do is remove the roughness layer we created before, as we want this wood to not have any finish over it, and also bring back the height information to the wood. Then let's head down to the base layer again, and we're going to make this wood look a bit brighter compared to the dark outer section. Same as before, select the color bar and let's quickly find a nice slightly brighter color. So far so good, but now we have the new brighter wood covering the entire handle, and we just want this to show up like smaller damaged areas. We'll use the same method as before and mask out the material by right-clicking it and selecting Add Black Mask, but this time we will use texture maps to help us create a believable damaged look. Let's right-click the black mask we created, and almost at the bottom there is the option to Add Fill. This will add a fill layer to the black mask, and you can see that there is now a grayscale slider here between black and white. If you go up to the drop-down menu here, we can select what maps we currently want to see. Let's choose the mask option to see how our black mask is looking to better understand. Here we can see it is fully gray in the viewport, and that corresponds to the grayscale value in the properties panel. As before, anything that is black in a mask will not be visible, and anything that is white is fully visible. All gray values in between are just different opacity values. This mask is gray now, which means that it is blending the dark and light wood 50-50. Since we want the damaged wood to show up as damaged sections, we can use a texture map for that, which is a black and white image pretty much with different images on it. We can find these in the textures section in the asset library. Here, there are a bunch of maps that can be used to drive the look of the black mask. So let's try and find one that looks like it could be damaged wood. This one, called Grunge Map 002, looks like it might be a good starting point. Let's select it and drag it all the way over to the fill layer properties and drop it on the grayscale value. We can now see that the grunge map we chose is driving the fill layer of the black mask. It doesn't look exactly right, so we can scroll up a bit to the projection options for the layer, and I'll select cylindrical projection. Since the handle is cylindrical, we might get a better result. This looks good, but there's still a bit too much white in the mask, meaning that there will be a lot of damaged wood, which I don't want. We can change the grunge map by scrolling down to the parameter section, and by lowering the balance slider, we can start removing some of the white from the mask. And if you would like more damaged wood, you could raise the balance instead. I think the balance is right, but I'm not a fan of how it looks still. We can go up to the seed option and randomize it a few times. This will change the variations of the grunge map while still keeping the same style of it. I quite like this one for a start, so let's keep it. You can press the hotkey M from any map view to head back to default material view again. And now we can see better what the mask is doing for us. Here, the lighter damaged wood is now where the white was in the mask, and it looks like a good starting point. It does, however, look like it's been more painted on at the moment, and that is most likely since there's no height difference. The damaged wood would in reality be more sunken into the handle. Let's add that detail as well. We can do that by creating a new fill layer at the top of the layer stack, and as before, it creates a fill layer with the white color where the damaged wood is. We don't need the color, so let's turn off the color selection and turn on the height one instead. A height map lets us create the look of small height differences on the surface without actually having anything there. Same as the roughness map, we now have a grayscale value slider. And for this one, we will just be lowering the amount a little bit towards the darker section, which will create the look of a height difference. But be careful, it's easy to go overboard with the values and make it look really weird. Looking at the damaged wood, I'd like to add some smaller details as well. So let's go up to the damaged wood folder and right-click the black mask and again choose Add Fill. And let's try to find a grunge map with some more smaller details on. I like the directional noise 3. Let's grab it over to the grayscale value and let's either use the drop-down menu or the hotkey C to move over to the mask view. Here we can already see that the grunge map is going in the wrong direction. We can change the rotations in the properties panel here, so I'll rotate it 90 degrees. There is, however, too much white in the mask now again, so I'll go ahead and lower the balance to get more black color back and randomize the seed a bit to get something better. This looks like what I want. A few smaller details added. However, going back to the material view with the M key, we can now see that the previous mask we worked on is not showing anymore. This is due to the layer's blending mode. The blending mode is how each layer should blend or interact with those below it. By default, a color fill layer has the blending mode normal, which just overwrites whatever is directly below. But we want it to add the new fill layer to the one below instead and complement each other. This can be changed by heading over to the fill layer we created, and as you can see, a small drop-down menu that says norm. Clicking this will open up a bunch of different options. If you're used to editing software like Photoshop, this might be familiar to you. In our case, we want to choose the option linear dodge add, which, as the name suggests, adds the current layer on top of the previous one. Now we can see in our mask that both our layers are combined. Looking at it together, I'll try my luck with randomizing the seed a few more times to get a better result. Changing the tiling like this makes the texture smaller, but can also cause some repetition, so be careful with that. Now I also have these scratches and indents showing that were baked in from the high poly mesh, and I'd like these to also have some of the damaged wood color. I'll need to add them with a new fill layer, so let's create that again in the same black mask, but this time we need to drag it to the bottom of the layers. Then down in the grayscale value, I'll press the large button here, which just opens up a smaller window where you can search for maps. In this case, I'll search for the ambient occlusion map. which is a black and white map that contains light data. It's mostly white, but the smaller baked details show up as black here, since they are shadowed. To better see what we're doing, let's go up to the other layers and click on this eye icon to hide them for now, and press C to enter the mask view. Already we can see that the darker areas are where the baked details we wanted are. However, if we want the baked areas to be visible, they need to be white, and the rest should be black in the mask. So we need to invert the ambient occlusion texture. We can do this by right-clicking our layer and selecting Add Levels, and make sure it's above the ambient occlusion fill layer, but below the other ones. The level layers will let us do two things that we need. First off, we can press the invert button here to invert the colors of the layer so that the details we want to keep are more white. But as we can see, they're a bit more gray and not strong white, which is the second thing the levels layer can do. It lets us use these value sliders here to crush the black and white values more and make them stand out. Pulling the black slider up almost to the end here gives us more of the result we're after. Pressing M to see the material view, this is looking good, and we can make the other layers visible again. But also remember to change the blending mode of the grunge map layer to linear dodge add, as it now needs to add on top of the one we just created. This is looking nice for the damaged wood section so far, I think, but it still looks a bit flat overall. Pressing C a few times to get to the roughness map view, we can see that we have almost no roughness variation outside of the two wood versions, which makes it look very unnatural since most things do not have a perfectly clean surface like this. So let's start adding some roughness differences to the handle as well. Below the damaged wood folder, I create a new folder and call it Roughness. I put it below the damaged wood as I only want the roughness variation to affect the varnished wood. Then we create a new fill layer and I'll name it High. Quick note that I'll set this value pretty low first because my brain is not working, but I'll change it to a higher value later. We also don't need any color, so let's activate only the roughness map for this fill layer. Then we set a roughness value that is higher than the base wood roughness. Then, as we do not want the roughness evenly spread like this, we right-click the fill layer and again select Add Black Mask, then right-click the mask and add fill layer, because we'll be using a texture again to drive the roughness map. So let's head over to the left asset library and search for grunge to get more random maps up. I like the grunge map 002 here, so I'll drag that over to the grayscale value in the properties panel and start adjusting the balance of the texture a bit. This will create more dull and rough parts of the handle, and we don't want them in too many places being super obvious, just something to break up how the light interacts with the wood when looking at it. It's a good idea here to go between the roughness map view and the material view by pressing M and C and rotating around the light a bit. If I drag down the roughness fully here as an example, we can better see the difference it makes to the wood and the overall look of the handle. And here I also realized that I needed the value to be higher instead of lower and fix that now. And we can see the effect it has on the wood, making it less glossy in the affected areas. Again, we don't want the roughness differences to be too high or extreme, so I lower the value a bit, since in general you don't want things in the roughness map to be completely black or white, except in some cases like with the damaged wood here. Now that the high value is looking alright, I'll head up and create a new fill layer and name it Low. Same as before, we create a black mask and then add a fill layer to it. And we can start adding for the lower roughness values. I quite like this grunge map 004 with spots on it. Also, don't forget like I did to remove the color from the fill layer and only have the roughness value on. Then, same as before, we can trick around a bit with the values until we find something we like. I try around with changing the tiling size, randomizing the seed to get different variations and things like that. With that done, I do some final minor changes to both the high roughness layer and the damaged wood base layer to not have too extreme values in the roughness map. As I mentioned, in general, it's good to keep closer to the gray values than black and white for the roughness layer. It's not intended to be super visible, but more to catch the light in a bit different way across the mesh. Lastly, for the handle, I add one more fill layer in the roughness folder and name it Scratch, and remove the base color and add a roughness value to it and set it fairly high. Same as before, we add a black mask and a fill layer to it, and for this I want to add the grunge Scratch's rough texture to the roughness value. As the name implies, we can see that it adds scratches to the handle. Making the tiling a bit higher and reducing the balance a bit just adds a bit more visual interest to the texture. But try not to overdo this one because it can really stand out in a bad way if it's too visible. All in all, I like how the wood looks, and a good idea is to head over to the render section right here to see the wood a bit better and closer to how it might look when you want to render it. You can press the display settings button right here and change the environment map that is used, which is kind of what lighting environment you want. I like to have the atelier one, but I'm happy with the wood texture now, so let's leave that and collapse the entire wood folder and create a new one, call it metal. Same as the wood, we'll be using a smart material as a base and then changing it to suit our needs. So let's head over to the Asset Library tab and press the Smart Material button, and then scroll all the way down here and see if we can find this one, Steel Tank Painted. Grab that and move it over to the metal folder we created. Again, as we can see, the smart material is applied to the entire model, which we don't want. So we'll right click the metal folder and click Add Black Mask, so that we can start masking out where the metal should be. Having the mask selected, we make sure that we are in polygon select mode here on the left, which you can see by the visible wireframe on the model, and then select Mesh Fill option here at the top. Then we're just going to click the top part of the grenade as well as the smaller part at the bottom. Alright, let's open up the Steel Tank Painted material folder here and see what it's made up of. So the first thing I feel that we can do without is this dust layer. So let's click it and press delete to remove it. Then, looking at my references, I want the paint to be a darker hue of green, and we also want to make it look like a thinner, shinier coat of paint instead of this thick looking rough one. I think the grenades were colored with lacquer paint or enamel paint, so that's the look we're going for. We can do most of those changes down here in the base layer of the material, as everything above is more related to dirt and things. First, in the base layer, let's go to the base color and press the color bar. I'll drag it down to desaturate it a bit and make it darker, and then we can go down to the roughness section and slowly pull down the value to make it a bit more reflective. When zooming in a bit, I feel there's a bit too much height values as well. The coated paint would have had a lot less surface noise. Now we can easily adjust this by going up to the drop-down menu here and selecting to affect the height map only, and then dragging down the height value of the base layer. I'll also try to reduce the normal map, as that can contribute to the values, but it doesn't seem to do too much. But here we can see that we have a lot more flat and even coat of paint, which fits the reference more. I feel we can still add some more interest to the material by adjusting some of the roughness values. So let's collapse the Steel Tank Painted folder and create a new folder and call it roughness like before, and add a fill layer inside of it, then rename it to high. As usual by now, we add a black mask to the layer as well, and then a fill layer to the black mask. And also make sure that the color channel is off and that the roughness value is on the higher end to start off with. Pressing C a few times or using the drop-down menu, we can go to the mask view to see better what we're doing. Now we go over to the Asset Library and open the Texture tab and find a grunge map that we like. I'm mostly just looking for something here that could look like a more dry or rough surface, and I think we can use the grunge plaster paint one. So I'll drag it over to my grayscale value to apply it. It seems to look nice, but there's definitely too much of it. So I'll start reducing the balance to make it not show up everywhere. And now I think it starts to look more like a dirty or dried part of the paint. I jump over to the roughness view also to get a better idea of how the overall roughness values for the painted metal is looking, and then to the material view to see it with some lights. It's looking alright, but it might stick out a bit too much, so I'll go ahead and lower the roughness value of the fill layer to make it a bit more subtle. The roughness though is still not quite there, and I think it's due to the painted metal material we added that has a pretty visible roughness layer called stains. If you press the small eye icon next to the layer right here, you can disable it without removing it, like I do. And now I think it looks more like we want it. And we can continue with the roughness maps by creating a new fill layer and calling it low. And this will of course have the lower roughness value in it. So disable the color channel and activate the roughness one and drag the value down. With this one, we want to create some smaller, more reflective surfaces. Same as before, add a black mask to the layer and then add a fill layer to the black mask. Here I try out a grunge map straight away and tested some different values for it, but in the end it didn't really look all that great. Most of the time it's best to try around with different textures to better see how they might look on the model itself. In the end, I chose the grunge humidity texture, and I think it looks alright, pretty much out of the box, so let's just go with that one. Lastly, I again create a new fill layer and as before call it scratches. Since most things that are used or carried around in some way probably get scratched and scuffed with time, so this fill layer will also be a roughness one with a pretty high value. Add the black mask to it, and since I know I want the scratch texture, I grab that from the asset library and drag it on top of the black mask, and it will automatically create a fill layer for me. Then, doing the final tweaks to the mask, I just want to make the scratches a bit smaller by raising the tiling value a bit, then increasing the contrast to remove any gray or transparent parts of the mask, and finally reducing the balance to reduce the overall amount of scratches. I think it looks quite nice in the end. Let's collapse all the folder and add the final thing to the grenade, which is a warning text these grenades had painted on them saying "Before use, insert detonator." Since the rest of the grenade is pretty banged up already, we'll also add some noise to the text as well. So let's start by creating a new folder within the metal folder and call it text. We could add like a white color and call it a day for the text, but let's make it look a bit extra nice with some more surface details. So we can head over to the Smart Materials library and again get the steel tank painted material and put it in the text folder. Then remove the dust layer from this as well, and then we head down to the base layer of the material, and here we change the color to a more white-gray hue. Now, to get this to show up as text, we'll create a black mask on the steel tank painted folder and add a fill layer on it. Then we can head over here to the text section of the asset library, and we can see that there are a bunch of different fonts to use. For this one, I'll use the Segowi UI Bold. You can select your font and drag it on top of your grayscale value, same as with the grunge maps. Now we can see a lorem ipsum text being added both in the 3D and 2D views. But it's a bit off, so let's fix the placement and what it says. I'll copy the text here from my references, and then you can either paste or write yourself in the text box in the layer properties panel. Then I'll center the text with the alignment options right here. We also need to scroll up in the properties panel here to the UV wrap options that is currently set to repeat, which means that the text will repeat to fill out the black mask, and we just want it to show up once. So in the drop down menu, select the option None. Now we can also see that we need to rotate the text, and you can do that by changing the rotation here by 90 degrees. Let's resize the text as well. And I think the easiest way is in the 2D view to click and drag on these small squares around the texture that control the tiling. You can also do this just by dragging the tiling slider. Then click and drag in the middle of the text in the 2D view to move it freely back to where you want it. Now we want to make it look like the paint has peeled away here and there, and we'll use a black mask for it again. We'll add the black mask to the text folder this time, so that we can control how much of the text can be shown. There are some paint peel grunge maps already, so we can search for that and use this grunge paint peeled. And now we can already see that the text is barely visible, so let's change that to make a bit of it have peeled away, but you can still read it. We can also see here that there's a lot of gray values in the masks, and several areas of the text seem to just have a lower opacity and can still be seen. And I want the text to either be fully visible or fully gone. So I have to raise the contrast in the properties panel to make sure that there are mostly just black and white values. Then raising the value of the balance slider as well, and I think this looks alright. And that about wraps it up for this lesson. We've gone through how to use basic materials in Substance Painter and how to adjust them to work best for you. Using black mask and textures, we have a procedural and fully non-destructive workflow, which means that we can go back to any part of the work we've done and change the parameters as we see fit at any time if we want to remove all damage, change color, or whatever it might be. I hope this tutorial was helpful for you. And please don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment if there's anything else you would like to see from this Substance Painter series. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.